Room Chats. I'm Bud Lauk, and this is my wife, Susan Lauk. And today we'd like to talk to you about the importance of truth, because truth leads to freedom. And freedom is a significant theme in the Bible, because God wants our free wills to be free, truly free, to make the choice to love people well and to have abundant relationships and an abundant life. One of the things that inhibits truth and freedom is what I like to call the no-speak rule. And the no-speak rule basically says that in a system, so a system can be a family, it can be a political organization, it can be a church, it could be any organization where you have individuals interacting. And in those interactions, you can have healthy interactions and you can have unhealthy interactions. So in an unhealthy group, whether it's a church or government or a family or just a husband and wife relationship, in any of those groups, one of the things that shows health and promotes health is the free expression of our truth to one another. Because that free expression, that ability to dialogue, which is called the Logos, which is what Christ was called, the Word, the Logos. The freedom to do that is what actually leads to truth. The freedom to have these open discussions and to disagree with each other in love, where the focus is to find truth, not to win. So in unhealthy systems, so for example, in a family where alcohol is a major factor, let's say you have one of the parents who's an alcoholic, there's a no-speak rule that gets implemented in unhealthy systems to protect the unhealthiness, to protect the lie and the very thing that's destructive to the relationships within that community. So again, and as an example, in an unhealthy family where, let's say, one of the family members is an alcoholic, no one is allowed to talk about what the real issue is and the impacts of that issue, or they will be punished or called out and manipulated. And that manipulation takes many forms. It can be deception, it can be the withholding of love and affection, it can be violence, it can be verbal abuse, and it can be physical abuse. So we wanted to talk about this today so that you can identify when it's happening, and we can talk about how to shift, creatively shift, not reactively shift, but creatively shift the culture of systems so that there can be open dialogue leading to truth, and we can break this no-speak rule. This is a really good rule to break, but it needs to be done correctly in love so you can have healthy outcomes. So Sue, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I loved what you said about taking creative action instead of a reaction, because I think oftentimes we speak, but it comes from either trying to defend ourselves or we're offended by what someone has said, so we're definitely reacting instead of creatively thinking, how do we want to bring a truth to the table without it creating more harm? And that's where it gets, I feel like that's where it gets tricky for people. Sometimes you can't parse out what is your own emotion behind a situation that's happening and wanting to put your 2 cents into it, so to speak, without it getting emotional. And so how would you say you could do that?
Yeah, so first let's try to define a little bit about what reactive is. So I want you to think about if you've broken your arm, you have a broken arm, and it's not healed. Well, if I have a healthy arm and somebody taps me on the arm like this, then I don't really have a reaction. I just kind of say, well, that's weird that you're tapping on my arm, and why are you doing that? What is it you're wanting me to know, or what's your reason for doing that? Help me understand. But if I have a fractured arm, a broken arm I've never allowed it to heal, and somebody just taps on it, I have a huge reaction. Like, what are you tapping on my arm for? How could you do that to me? Don't you even know I have a broken arm? Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of assumptions there of how we protect ourselves when we have brokenness in our lives. Mm-hmm. And it causes us to be very reactive. And one of the things that causes a lot of reaction is bitterness. Bitterness is a big form of brokenness that people aren't often even aware of, unforgiveness and bitterness. And that drives a lot of unhealthy interactions. So the key is, for myself, when I'm getting offended or I'm feeling like I want to have a big reaction, I have to say, well, what sore spot is this touching? Mm-hmm. And what that does is that allows me to step back and contemplate a little bit more and pray a little bit more. And I can go from this reactive thinking, right, which is caused by hurt and brokenness and things from the past, usually old things. And I can stop and I can explore, how can I do this in a non-reactive way so that I actually create a new environment. I create something new in this relationship mm-hmm. that I move forward with. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't always help when there's a lot of unhealthiness in systems or relationships. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to talk about this a lot today, but that's when we need to start drawing boundaries with things. And boundaries are important because a boundary is an invitation for someone else to become healthier. Mm-hmm. It's an invitation. People don't always accept those invitations. But that is a really nice non-reactive way to interact in healthy relationships by simply asking for what we want to be different in the relationship. That's a really neat way to create a different environment.
So when I think of this in terms of us, I think in our early years, we both came from such broken homes, and I think everybody comes from brokenness of some sort. No home's perfect. So you're always coming into a relationship with patterns of thinking that you're not even recognizing. So early on, I think we definitely practiced the no speak rule a lot. And I know I did, and looking back now from, my position today, how long have we been married?
Almost 40 years. Right?
39 years? Yeah, so looking back, I feel like part of my issue was I thought there's a few things that I think drive that underlying don't talk about it rule. And one is you're afraid that if you bring it to the surface and actually talk about it, it will escalate something and it will bring conflict. So if you're a conflict avoider, which I have been almost my whole life, then you're going to do everything to keep away from the actual issue because it feels like a death of some sort to bring it to the surface. It feels like you could die if you talk about this. And then if it's something related to yourself, for me, it felt like if I talked about it, the shame would kill me. Like it really feels like, I think, like you could die if you talk about something.
Yeah, and I agree with that. There's two things that I experience and I see with couples and working with couples and marriage counseling experience. One is, it's the what if. I start playing what I call the what if game.
Yeah.
So if I do this, what if I do this, then what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And it keeps us so paralyzed. And so I like to ask myself, well, what's the worst that could happen?
I know, you stop. Sue, what's the worst thing that can happen? I could die.
Right. And that's what it feels like.
Right, it's what it feels like.
It really feels
but
like
it's not the truth.
But it's not true.
Right.
Right. We might have a disagreement. We might have a fight. And so it's really important that we don't play the what if game. And then the second thing is when we can't communicate clearly and we don't feel like we have a freedom to communicate clearly what our needs are and the changes we'd like to see, what we do is we go underground with it.
Absolutely.
And when we go underground with our needs, getting our needs met, nothing good comes from that. That's what leads us into bondage and addiction and the breaking of relationships and vows and relationships. Because think of it this way, if I can't openly ask for what I need, my only choice is to manipulate for what I need.
Right. Which is what I fell into all the time, right? Then there's subtleties going on that the other person doesn't even understand, right? We have a story we share a lot. So there were things about just having children and the stress of that and getting things cleaned up. And I found myself every night at the kitchen sink and having this inner dialogue of, what am I, everyone's slave? Nobody helps me. Nobody offers to help clean the dishes. And I'm having this absolute inner dialogue of, the poor me, right? And it's not as if I hadn't asked, but it's like it wasn't something that we were reinforcing even as a family unit at that point. So, but the funny part of it was that I think one night you randomly opened the refrigerator and you said, "Oh, we're out of milk." And I was, in my head, I'd already been so far down a path of discussion with you and the kids of, how fed up I was, that I think I turned around and I was like, "Yeah, we're out of milk. And I just can't do it all, okay?" And you were like, "Whoa, what just hit?" Right? Like the train wreck that you didn't even know, you couldn't even see it coming. But that really speaks to, because I wasn't speaking out loud, and I probably didn't do it in healthy ways back then, but just saying, "Hey, you guys, I can't do all of this for everyone. I need everyone to pitch in. What can you do? What can you do?" And, it's teenagers, so they're not always responsive in that sort of way. But I think just even bringing it to the surface more than once probably would have to be necessary, of trying to gain consensus of the family. Instead, I chose the route just to have this inner dialogue at the kitchen sink and then, boom, don't you dare imply that I've screwed things up because I didn't buy milk. So yeah, it's a great example of why that kind of no speak rule is so harmful to the system.
Right, and I've done the same things in our relationship too, but let's unpack this one a little bit. So this really shows the power of having that internal dialogue and taking the steps to externalize that dialogue in a healthy way, which not only is better for you, but it's better for the family and the children, because what it does is it allows us to bring out our requests for what we need, the help we need, or the affection we need. And when we bring that on the table, and in this example, there could be no agreements made about who was going to do what, because everybody assumed that mom was fine doing all of that.
And maybe they weren't, because kids pick up on things, so they could have picked up on and so could have you, maybe the underlying tension or even anxiety, but you wouldn't be able to identify why. It's just an atmosphere that's created that nobody can actually pinpoint. Something's off, and I don't know what it is.
It's the eggshell effect.
Totally.
And so everybody's walking on eggshells because they can feel the tension,
but nobody knows why.
And there's no resolution to it at all. And so in this case, it's healthy for the kids to help and pitch in. It helps them to not be as selfish and to be more aware of what other people's needs are. And so the ability to express those needs and get them out in a healthy way leads to what I like to call new agreements in relationships. And that promotes this concept of speaking and bringing things into the light. Because a lot of times we have perceptions, like you talked about how everybody comes into a relationship, you're forming a new family, and you come with baggage, and you have different rules in those families. You have different culture and rules. And so a lot of times what we experience as children, we have perceptions, but they're not always true.
Exactly.
And the only way to explore those perceptions is to bring them into the light and talk about them in a healthy way without the reactive way of communicating those things. And I'll tell a quick story too, because we're almost out of time, but like our first couple weeks of marriage were like lambs to the slaughter a little bit with each other, because you don't understand.
Right,
You don't understand where the minds are. And so I come home one day and there's a note with all these things from Sue that can you do this?
Right.
Can you do this? Can you clean the garage? Can you do this? So in Sue's home, that was an accepted method of communication. Right?
Notes.
In my home, notes like that were like a big taboo. And so when I came in and read the note, I was like, what? And we had this, and she's like, what? And we had this big old fight about it, right? And
like, of course you write notes to each other if it needs to be done, right? And you're like, of course you don't write notes.
right. It's like, I'm going home to mother, and I'm like, good. And then we ended up working it out. So that's the difference: is discovering the correct forms of communication and working those things out. So
yeah, and our hope is at this point, it's always 20/20 hindsight, but our hope for all of you is that you can glean some of these tools now, because what I have learned now over 35, 40 years is that speaking it out is the most powerful thing we can do to create new healthy thinking patterns, new healthy communication skills, but it has to be put out. And it's not in an accusation or that sort of way, but just letting out what you're thinking and feeling in a way that then can be solved is so powerful. It seems so simple, but it's a game changer.
So just a quick summary.
Sure.
So one, the no speak rule, that's a rule that needs to be broken, but it needs to be broken in a healthy way, in a creative way, so that we bring new things and new agreements and new ways of drawing close and getting our needs met and meeting the needs of others in our communities. I call them systems, but they're communities and families, and our marriages and our relationships with our children. And so what we want to promote is, in our families and our homes and our systems, we want to promote these dialogues, these logos, where people are able to ask for what they'd like to see done differently, where they're able to ask and express what their needs are and what their wants are, without retaliation, but more like, well, help me understand that. Let's explore that together, and let's come to truth together. So really unhealthy systems, and we've seen this in government systems, where you're not allowed to talk about truth or the elephant in the room, and people are thrown in jail and murdered for that. But we see it in family systems in the same way, where when we break the no speak rule, people are put in jail or punished or controlled. And it's just very, very unhealthy. So our healthiest systems, our healthiest families, our healthiest marriages, our healthiest relationships with our children are where dialogue can happen. And people can speak their truth without it being filtered, but we don't leave it there. We explore together till we come to truth and agreement together.
Nice job.